Yeah, so I'm Jonathan from Herasight. We do genetic testing of embryos, and IVF has been around for a long time. It's about 50 years old now, and in the standard process, you stimulate the ovaries, produce some eggs, and create embryos from eggs and sperm. And so, in the past, people have selected pretty arbitrarily between which embryo to implant. What we do is reveal a lot more information about the embryos. And for about 30 years, you could test for those really rare single gene disorders, the kind that cause Tay Sachs or sickle cell anemia. But the vast majority of what we care about, whether it's disease traits or height or intelligence, is highly polygenic, meaning they involve thousands, tens of thousands of genetic variants that add up to an overall probability that you'll develop type 1 diabetes, be a certain height, et cetera. So that's the kind of thing we do. And these are some of the traits we offer, physical and mental traits, whether it's selecting against schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, selecting in favor of height, intelligence, and so on. We have an overall longevity index that I won't show on the slides, but that sums up the overall sets of risks from different diseases, and we put those into disease-adjusted life years. So you can also kind of compress all the information we give into an overall longevity index. And this is how we compare. There are a few other companies in the space, but this is how we compare with our best competitor, which is Orchid. And that is to say, when you look at the overall R squared values, that is the amount that we can predict genetically of any particular trait, we beat them on every trait that we offer, as well as offering more traits than any other company offers, and that includes intelligence. So just to take an example, we've developed the world's best IQ predictor. This has been 4 years in the making, and if you have 10 embryos, we can predict a spread of about 15 IQ points. That's actually half of the overall variance, and it's remarkable, but if you were to have 10 siblings as adults, or you had 10 embryos, the actual difference in range between IQ, between the lowest and highest scoring, would be about 30 points, and we can now predict just over half of that. Okay, and if you want to know what is the appetite for this sort of thing, well, among Americans, almost half say they would already select for cognitive ability. In Singapore, the number is almost 80%. So in those countries where this isn't taboo, nearly everyone wants it. And even in the countries where there are some taboos around it, about half the population want it. And that's, again, just selection for IQ, separately from disease traits. Next. And what we have, probably the most important thing that we can do is actually not just the quality of our predictors or the quantity, but we have an entirely new way of doing things that allows us to scale internationally. And we serve people around the world right now. And that is because there are two ways of doing this. To reveal all these traits about embryos, you can either whole genome sequence them directly, which is very hard and very expensive. Orchid is the first to do it. We can do it too. But we actually developed an algorithm where we can take data from a common test that's done in any IVF clinic, that is the test for Down syndrome, and we can take the really sparse genetic data from that, and then we can whole genome sequence the parents, knowing that embryos are a function of parental DNA. And this is a sophisticated way of doing things, but we do both short and long read sequencing. And from that data from the parents, plus the data from the Downs test, we can fill in the rest of the genome of each discrete embryo and thereby reveal the entire genetic sequence of each discrete embryo without directly whole genome sequencing it. And what that allows us to do then is to send people to almost any IVF clinic in the world of their choice. They could go to Dubai, where Sebastian is right now, or Mongolia, and they can take this Downs test, request the raw data from that test, then we sequence the parents, and we put that together to reveal all this other information. And I'll try to be quick about this, so I'll finish in a minute or two because I don't have too much time here. But what this shows you on the right is what our interactive report looks like on the left. That's for any given trait. Since we can infer or impute the whole genome of each discrete embryo, and we have these really cool predictors that are quite powerful, we can reveal all of these interesting things to people who either have a family history of disease on the one hand, maybe it's schizophrenia, maybe it's Crohn's disease. And overall, because everyone faces some risks, we can compare the embryos on the right-hand side. You can see that against one another with respect to all of the traits that we can predict. So we've already served about 100 people and have about a dozen babies born. And basically, in the future, and the future is now, it's basically this year, we're going to go from serving predominantly Americans and a few Europeans to serving the whole world. And we have a few ways of doing that. One way is to get government contracts with countries in the Middle East where cousin marriage is common, and we have a solution to that. Another way is to get insurance subsidies, but we're also working directly with IVF clinics and direct to consumer, because with this new imputation strategy, we can actually go on podcasts like I do all the time and just capture people's attention, say, this is what we do, this is interesting. Go to your IVF clinic, request your raw genetic data from this common aneuploidy test, and we can do the rest for you. And that's pretty much it. So we're going to go from 3% of Western nations use IVF right now. About half of our customers already do it electively in order to optimize traits or reduce disease. And we're going to go from 3% to a much, much bigger percent in the coming years. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. I firmly believe that embryo selection is going to be the greatest public health advance of our lifetimes, probably, and it's low-hanging fruit. I mean, we already have the information, right? So we might as well take advantage of it. So, yeah, I think we don't have that much time. Maybe one quick point would be, you've got the backing and blessing of a lot of the most famous Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and prominent people, and you're speaking with some governments as well. What would be the argument to governments to avail themselves of this technology?
Well, the argument to governments in the Middle East is because cousin marriage has been so common for 1,000 years that there are a lot of genetic problems that could be easily solved by just choosing the embryo with the lowest runs of homozygosity, basically meaning it's just going to have fewer diseases and inadvertently have a higher IQ without even testing for IQ, simply because there are 1,000 ways to screw up the genome. And when you marry a cousin, those ways can manifest themselves. And there are a few ways to improve it. So that's the one pitch for governments. But the other pitch is places like Israel, where I just was, and Singapore. They already have robust public health systems and mandatory genetic testing in some cases. They certainly subsidize it already for everyone else. And so it would be a really short step for them to also subsidize not just single gene disorders, which is a tiny fraction of them, but polygenic disorders, which is most of what people care about when it comes to diseases, but also other traits that really have public health benefits, including, I think, intelligence. And I'll just say, sorry, quickly, 10-second version of that is, intelligence is correlated with a host of important life outcomes, ranging from length of life to subjective quality of life, and these are measurable, to just overall good health outcomes, precisely because intelligence is correlated with long-term planning, self-control, and a variety of other traits that are indirectly connected with health traits. So thanks, Sebastian.
Excellent. Amen to that. And everybody should check out Jonathan's book, Creating Future People. It's online, in which he goes into the ethics and long-term considerations of embryo selection.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Yeah, going on next, we've got a presentation from Ryan at Syntax.